All right, welcome back. We are now working at in chapter 9 of the Small Life Care book, and we are going to look at the skill known as act against. And act against what? Act against emotions. All right, now I want to preface this section by saying that we're not saying that there's anything wrong with emotions, okay? Emotions are wonderful, they are complex, they can bring beauty and significance and closeness and connection. They can prompt us. In fact, emotions carry an action urge, and they prompt us to action in times when there's no time to think. You see something dangerous coming, and your emotion tells you, get out of the way. It's a fear response, for example, and you know, danger, move. And there's just no time to think, so your emotion prompts you to action. And even in relationships, a feeling of love can prompt you to action or protection. When there's maybe not time to think about it, maybe you don't need to think about it. You just need to act, and to act in the moment. And so just want to make sure that we all understand that we're not invalidating emotion as being something that is unnecessary or illogical or anything like that. As I say in the book, we're made in God's image. God is an emotional being. Therefore, we have emotions. We are emotional beings. And so that's part of what it looks like to be made in God's image, is to have emotion. Okay. However, God is not controlled by his emotions. And by that, what I mean is he doesn't do things out of emotion that contradict his character. Okay? And so at least part of what it means to become more like Christ as we mature, as we grow in our faith and as human beings, is to be able to somewhat harness our emotions and make them work for us in ways that are consistent with our values, consistent with our character, consistent with the people that we want to be. And just because we feel like doing something doesn't necessarily mean that we should do it if it's going to contradict our values, our long-term goals, our beliefs, okay? And so that's what this section is all about, is we're going to learn, what is the purpose of each of the primary emotions, because they do serve a purpose. And by that, I mean these emotions contain an action impulse, and they tell us something about the world in terms of how we're interpreting it, okay? And so we are going to learn to just, first ask ourselves, is this emotion justified? And by that I mean, does it fit the facts of the situation? And if the answer to that is yes, then we ask the next question, which is, will doing what this emotion wants me to do, is that going to help me achieve my long-term goals? Is that going to help me to live out my values? Is that consistent with my beliefs? And if so, do it. Do the action. And graciously accept whatever the consequences might be. If it's not consistent with my values, then even if I'm feeling it really strongly, then I really want to think twice before I act on this emotion, because it's going to cause me to do something that later I might have to make amends for. And so we are going to kind of go through that process with each of the primary emotions in this section. And we're going to check, okay, now that we know the purpose of this emotion, we're going to ask, does it fit the facts? And will it help me? Is it consistent with my values? And if it's not, if the answer to both of those questions is no, then we're not going to try and think our way out of the emotion. So like in the cognitive behavioral coaching session, we talked about how to change your emotions by changing the way that you think about a certain situation, maybe the way you think about the world, maybe the way you think about yourself. And the hope is that as we change our thinking, our emotions shift and our behaviors shift as well. And remember, we said that our thoughts, our emotional responses, our behavioral responses, and our physiological responses, that those are all connected. And I gave you that illustration of imagine a thought is here, which leads to an emotion, which leads to a behavior, which leads to a physiological response, and then back to another thought, and that all of that happens in like a split second. And that if you can short circuit that at any point in that circuit, then you can change it. You can change your emotion change your thought in order to change your emotion. Or a behavioralist would say, just change the behavior and the emotion and the thought will change. And so this is kind of what we're going to do here is we're not going to try and address the thinking that generates the emotion. Because in some situations or with certain people, they may have a very difficult time identifying the thought that goes with the emotion, or they may feel like the thought comes after the emotion, not before it. Or there might just not be time to take yourself through a lengthy cognitive behavioral coaching process where you're trying to reformulate your thoughts around a specific event or a specific situation. And so sometimes when you're in one of those situations, you just need to act your way out of the emotion. You're going to behave your way out of the emotion. And by changing your behavior, remembering that circle, you change the behavior, which changes the emotion, which changes the thought and the physiological response. Okay? So, and of course the emotion. So that's what we're going to do in this next section. In this current section, we're going to look at each one of those primary emotions. We're going to look at, when does the emotion fit the facts and is justified, and when it doesn't, how can we act against the emotion? How can we behave our way out of the emotion? What are some specific strategies that we can use for each emotion? Okay? So, if you have a client who struggles with anger, or perhaps they struggle with attraction to someone who, isn't their spouse or isn't good for them in some way, or perhaps they struggle with jealousy, or perhaps they struggle with, guilt or shame. And the cognitive behavioral coaching approach just doesn't seem to be working for them in certain situations, then this is an approach that would work really well. And if you just go to Appendix 1 real quick, just again, so we can kind of give a reminder of where we are in the material here. So Appendix 1, again, on the left there, you have that rectangle full of skills that you're going to use every single meeting. And we've pretty much covered all of these at this point. And then, first task, second task, third task, fourth task, and you're kind of getting to know the client, collecting the history, building trust, building rapport, and all those first 4 tasks. And then down at the bottom, the 4 rectangles, these are different interventions that you can use as a coach to help your client. And so we are in the emotions section, which is kind of a blend of emotions and behaviors but it's listed there in motions. What emotions lead to unwanted actions, act against unhelpful or unwanted emotions. Okay? And so this is down in the kind of coaching plan that you're going to put together, which is going to be dependent upon what are the issues that your client presents with. But if you get to a point where your client is saying, yeah, I've got these emotional impulses, I can't seem to control them, they just overwhelm me in the moment, and they're kind of predictable in the sense that they happen around the same situations, certain people, certain times of the year, certain times of the day, and they know, it's coming. They're gonna be in this situation, this emotion's gonna come up, and they're gonna need some go-to strategies where they can just act their way out of that emotion. They don't have time to think. They know they don't have time to think. They just need to act, and in acting, they will wind up changing their emotion. All right. So hopefully that all makes sense, and it'll make even more sense as we get into the specific emotions and start to unpack what you can do as you work with each one of those. Okay, so I'll see you in those videos coming up next.